Okay, this part 4 is going to be a little bit shorter because these projects are individualized every time I work with somebody. So the actual meat of it is below this, where I've got the individual assignments to individual students. But part 4, teaching, precepting, scholarship, and peer review. Scholarship is a fancy way of saying, publish or perish. You have to publish, especially if you're at a research university. For someone that teaches like me, that my role is primarily teaching, second is service, and then if I publish, great. But really, it's all about the teaching at the school that I teach at, because I teach at a community college. So the nice thing about teaching at community college is that someone who is in a doctoral program will have significant competence in the courses I teach, chemistry, pharmacology, so that while maybe on a rotation where they're in some advanced critical care, they're going to feel completely lost for significant portion of it and maybe gain some competence at the end. Whereas they'll have competence in the topic and they can focus on, instead of the topic or worrying about mastery of the topic, they can focus on mastery of the teaching of a topic, which is kind of nice. But you also want to share what you learn, and scholarship is really about sharing your innovations. And a PhD, for example, not a Pharm.D, but a PhD, for example, is really the reason you have to have a thesis is that you must, in some way, usually very narrow way, advance the scholarship that's out there. And after that, whatever number of years it is, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, you have to have made a significant contribution. And through your contribution, a committee says, yeah, that was important what you did. I like what you did. And then, you get your PhD. But the finish rate for a PhD is 50%. So while most people make it to the finish line in pharmacy school or medical school or dental school, whatever it is, a professional degree, a graduate degree like a PhD, only half of the people make it to the finish line. Understandably, some people's research goes wrong. A lot of things can happen. So one thing is that when you take your role in academia or teaching, and this is more than precepting, but one of the first things you have to do is decide on a textbook for each of the classes you teach. And you'll communicate with the various representatives, and then they'll use you as a resource to judge the value of books and articles. And a lot of times you'll start to get emails, hey, this is such and such publisher. Could you look at this book? And they'll give you like a chance to enter a gift card for $25 or something like that. And that's the very first thing you'll do. But as they come out with new editions, they may ask you to be a reviewer. So from this, some of the editors may reach out for you to formally review their resources. So when I was in charge of a pharmacy technician program, I was asked to review books, and my name goes in the little insert in the beginning, and that has this list of reviewers, people that looked at it. And what it does is it gives it some gravitas, some ethos, and says, hey, these smart people looked at it, and so this is a good book, you should buy it. So when I was asked to review them, eventually I was asked to write them focusing on the pharmacology portion, because I'm a pharmacist and I teach pharmacology to undergraduates. So in the same way as you develop an expertise, you want to start on becoming part of a review team. And then eventually you may become part of the writing team that creates the books in your area. So the person who had written the last revision didn't want to do the next one for whatever reason. Maybe they had a new project. Maybe they had something else going on in their life, because it takes a lot of time to do half of a book, or even sometimes a single chapter can take quite a bit of work, quite a bit of time. And there's not a lot of money in it, but it's just kind of a neat activity to do. But if you look closely at some very famous books like Coda Kimball's Applied Therapeutics, The Clinical Use of Drugs, you'll notice the authors of one edition are Caroline S. Zind, I think it is, and Michael G. Carvalho, and that's a legacy product. The original authors remain in some regard on the title because it's so famous that somebody would say, well, what is Zind Carvalho? Oh, that's Coda Kimball. And so they keep the legacy name. And the original authors remain sometimes in some regard, but in general, they're not integral to the updates. They've done their thing for 20 years or whatever. Same way, Grey's Anatomy, not Grey's, Grey, from TV fame, but Grey's Anatomy, the book, has an editor-in-chief, and it's Susan Standring, and it's also a legacy book. So Standring obviously is not Grey. Grey was a physician. So there are many of these legacy books, and your first foray into actually working with a textbook publisher is that you may work on a legacy book in which you're contributing either a chapter, a half a book, or maybe even doing the whole book, and you get an author credit, but in some way they say you're doing an update. You're the new author in town. So on the other side of it is kind of the peer-reviewed publication, which is so valuable when you're applying to residency because it's so rare that it happens. But I did this with a number of students from the local pharmacy school, and you can look back at the Iowa Pharmacy Association Q1 Journal of 2015, and it was the only real group that really was just really intent on doing this publication. It kind of fizzled out, but then one of them kind of took hold, and we finished it and put it in for publication. And all of them went on to do residencies, and all of them, two of them I think went to PGY2. But anyway, so I've done that, and I have experience with that. But at this, this particular group that I'll be working with will probably be working more on legacy books. Different times of the semester, I can always help with peer review and things like that. I'm familiar with both. I was in a PhD program for rhetoric and professional communication, and interestingly, it was the schedule that kind of got me. For whatever reason, they decided to make all the classes from 3 to 6 in the afternoon, and I've got kids, and I couldn't do that. So I ended up getting an online master's in human-computer interaction, but that's neither here nor there. So anyway, two kind of things that you can kind of make your mark in terms of publishing. One is the textbook type of thing where many students will be using your material, and your name might go on it as the author of a legacy work, or eventually you get your own. And the other side is the peer-reviewed journal article. Maybe you're doing the research, and usually, just so you know the order, the reason why the students went first and I went last is that usually the people that do the real work are the ones that get the full author credit, and then the supervisor or the person who's supervising the research is the one that gets the final credit. So the person that's actually the person in charge of it always goes last. But the lead author is the one who is most instrumental in making sure that it gets done. And sometimes the order is a point of contention. Sometimes it's just alphabetical. But that's what I'm going to go over just with scholarship and peer review again. The reason why it's so short is because everything is set up for each person. They've given me the pathophysiologic states that they're most interested in. They've at least gotten their top couple, and they'll be doing work on chapters in those particular states that they are either expert in or have the most interest in. And then there's a couple that they may be a little less interested in, but this will shore up probably some gaps that they have. I think there's definitely with infectious disease, the very first thing that most people do when they go into infectious disease rotation is kind of a penance where they're like, I just want to let you know that ID is not really a strong suit for me, and it just happens that this is just one of those kind of things where it's tough to kind of get that much because you've got antibiotics, antifungals, antivirals, all of this stuff going on. So not to feel bad about that.